No fish by 2048. So announced the front page headline of the New York Times in 2006, summarizing the shocking conclusion of a peer-reviewed article in Science magazine. By that date, we were led to believe the world's oceans will have been completely emptied of fish. While the prediction was probably overly dire and certainly overly exact, it did capture a deeply disturbing and vitally important trend. Worldwide, major fisheries are in decline. Estimates suggest that most of the world's major fish stocks have been reduced from historical numbers by 75 to 95% or more. What factors are causing this near collapse of our fisheries? First, world population stands at 7 billion and counting. Second, advancements in fish technology such as purse seines, trawlers, long lines, and satellite-guided boats. Third, the positive feedback cycle of overexploitation. Overfishing has led to a decrease in numbers of fish, which has led to an increase in their value, which has led to overfishing. To cite an example of price inflation, a single bluefin tuna recently sold in Japan for $175,000. Finally, and most importantly, is the fact that the world's oceans are owned by everybody. What happens when everybody owns a resource in common? What happens is, no one takes responsibility for the long-term health of the resource, and over time, it degrades. Garrett Hardin, famously among economists that is, coined a phrase for this. He called it the tragedy of the commons. 2,000 years before Hardin, Aristotle warned of this phenomenon. He said, "For that which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. Everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly at all of the common interest." Today, we might say, in the entire history of the world, no one has ever washed a rented car. Or, even more succinctly, property rights matter. The result of treating the world's fisheries as a global commons has been a free-for-all that has decimated many of the world's fisheries. That's the bad news. The good news is, and there is good news, there is an exception to this troubling trend, a place where thoughtful policies have resulted in vibrant, viable ecosystems and healthy, sustainable fisheries. Alaska, which provides the United States with half of our wild-caught fish, is pointing the way toward a sustainable future. In sharp contrast to the deplorable shape of many of the world's fisheries, those of Alaska are thriving, and the ecosystems upon which the fish depend are remarkably healthy. Why is that? What's different about the way Alaska fisheries are managed? Primarily this. Managers have enacted and enforced policies with the understanding that property rights matter. You might say they have privatized the commons. Way back in 1959, at the beginning of Alaska's statehood, it was written into the state constitution that Alaska's fisheries be managed in a sustainable manner. This implied a number of things, the most important of which was that Alaska needed to develop and enforce policies to prevent overfishing. Specifically, what are these policies? Before we answer that, let's look at some policies that were tried but didn't work. First was the idea of capping the number of fishermen. This failed because the remaining fishermen simply doubled down on their efforts. A second idea was to limit the number of days in the season. The result? In one case, this caused the season to shrink to 2 days, creating mayhem and danger, glutting the market and crashing fish prices. A third idea was to limit technology. However, enforcement proved difficult, as incentives for fishermen were counter to the law. So, what did work? Well, if the goal is to cap the number of fish caught in a given season, why not cap the number of fish caught in a given season? In fact, that's exactly what Alaska has done. First, scientists established the total allowable catch for the season, taking a precautionary approach that guaranteed fish populations remained at viable levels. Second, and here's the key, ownership shares were sold to fishermen. These shares provided a right to catch a fraction of the total allowable catch. It was as if Alaska's fishermen suddenly no longer rented cars, but rather owned them. Everything changed because the fish you don't catch today will still be there for you tomorrow. Fish in the water now have value. As a consequence, things relax. The need for the latest technology disappears. Competition is replaced by cooperation. Markets stabilize. Fishermen self-police. Communities benefit from the smooth annual cash flow. Of course, all of this is dependent upon buy-in on the part of the stakeholders and a vigilant and respected enforcement agency. So, how can we take this approach that has been so successful for Alaska and apply it to fisheries around the globe? Most importantly, we must do as Alaska has done and privatize the commons. That is, we must establish and distribute ownership shares to fishermen for every major fish species in every major fishery. This is the best way to prevent fishermen from harvesting every last fish from the ocean. Of course, these shares must be based on a scientifically derived total allowable catch. Additionally, there must be an enforcement component to ensure that rules are being followed. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization is the best choice for coordinating the establishment of total allowable catches and the distribution of ownership shares for fisheries on the high seas. Individual nations could do the same thing within their 200-mile zones. Enforcement might be shared by the largest stakeholders such as Japan, China, and the United States, as well as by each fishing nation. If we are to bring back and stabilize the world's major fisheries, two additional measures are required. First, the issue of bycatch, that is, unwanted, wasted, non-commercial fish species, must be addressed by modifying or prohibiting certain fishing practices. Secondly, because so many fisheries are so depleted, we must establish wilderness parks in the world's oceans, and lots of them. Fishing would be completely prohibited within the parks, in time allowing fish populations to recover and to return to viable levels. Not an overnight undertaking, but a necessary one if we are to nurse Earth's oceans back to health. For inspiration, we need only to look to Alaska, whose state motto is North to the Future.